Here in the presence of Washington and Lincoln, we honor those 20th century Americans who took up the struggle during the Second World War and made the sacrifices to perpetuate the gift our forefathers entrusted to us, a nation conceived in liberty and justice. World War II was the largest conflict in American history.
This was a case in which Western civilization itself hung in the balance.
16 million men and women volunteered or were drafted.
Everybody was contributing to the war effort at that time.
It was all about freedom and the future of the free world.
Nearly 400,000 Americans died to preserve our way of life. And yet, for more than half a century, no national memorial remembered their sacrifice. Now that has changed. This is the story of the World War II Memorial and the generation of Americans it commemorates.
Major funding for this program was provided by the Disabled American Veterans National Service Foundation, saluting the heroes of World War II and all who protect our heritage of freedom. DAV works to build better lives for disabled veterans and their families. And by Ford Motor Company Fund, celebrating a remarkable tribute to American courage, honor, and sacrifice. We are proud to join in sponsoring this presentation of the World War II Memorial, a testament to freedom.
It's been a long time coming, but the World War II Memorial has now taken its rightful place among the other great monuments in our nation's capital. Hi, I'm Tim Russert. This is not a memorial to war. Rather, it celebrates the unity of the nation during a conflict that engulfed the entire world. It pays tribute to citizen soldiers who placed themselves in harm's way in the Atlantic and Pacific theaters of engagement. It recognizes the critical contribution of Americans on the home front from every state and territory. It remembers the darkest hours of the war and the greatest victories. It honors those who made the ultimate sacrifice to restore freedom and end tyranny. But above all, this memorial preserves the memory of a vanishing generation of Americans who sacrificed their own self-interest for the greater good of the nation. This is their testament to freedom. The National Mall in Washington tells our country's story. But one great chapter was missing.
It took a long time to develop the World War II Memorial, primarily because the veterans returning didn't have much interest in being memorialized.
The men and women came home from the war. All they wanted to do was get back to work, get on with their lives.
The Vietnam Veterans Memorial broke the ice, and we proceeded backwards to the Korean War Memorial. I think all of a sudden people said, hey, what about World War II, the biggest event of the 20th century?
In 1987, a combat veteran named Roger Durbin asked his congresswoman why there was no memorial to World War II in the nation's capital.
I said, well, sir, I think there is a memorial. Iwo Jima. He said, wrong. That's to one service. He said, there's no World War II memorial. I thought, this is unbelievable.
With the 50th anniversary of the war's end approaching in 1993, Congress finally passed legislation authorizing a national memorial to the World War II generation.
It became obvious that soon there'd be no one left who had experienced the war.
It really became our task to take their story into history.
The flames of World War II were burning long before it touched American soil. Nazi Germany under Adolf Hitler was overrunning Europe. In the east, the militaristic government of Japan had brutally invaded mainland China. America declared neutrality and clung to the hope for peace. Then came December 7th, 1941, the Day of Infamy.
It was a Sunday, and I was listening to the radio, and the announcer came on and said, Pearl Harbor is being bombed. And suddenly 3 aircraft flew right above us with red, round dots.
But the noise woke me up from the bombs. And then the night nurse said, "The island of Oahu has been attacked by Japan." I said, "Shut up."
When the first torpedo hit, I didn't know it was a torpedo. I just knew whatever it was a hell of an explosion. I then went out and looked around and found the captain, severely wounded. I got some first aid kits to get morphine out of him, but this was peacetime, and there was no morphine in the kit.
I can't remember the injuries except a leg amputation. And I thought, I don't know whether I can hold up under the sound of sawing a bone.
2,341 Americans died that day, many trapped below decks in watery graves.
The thought that lasts in my mind about Pearl Harbor more than any of the others is that it united the country.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
Where do you begin to make a memorial to World War II? After a long search, sponsors were convinced it should be located between the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument, two of the most revered symbols of our country.
World War II was the defining event in the 20th century, just as Lincoln's preservation of the Union was a defining event of the 19th century, and the Washington Monument was the defining event of the 18th century, that is, the establishment of the United States.
This was a controversial decision because some believed that the main axis of the mall was architecturally complete. A coalition was formed to prevent any further building.
This has become the public gathering space, the marching place where we celebrate our freedom. The symbolic and the physical continuity will be broken.
It was the thought that the mall is so important that any change would somehow be wrong.
The design of the National Mall has changed many times since it was first conceived in 1792. The current boundaries were established by the Macmillan Plan early in the 20th century.
In terms of the siting of this memorial, my preference was for a site off-center, located in a grove of trees, the Constitution Gardens site, it's called. In the process of considering this, of touring the sites, I became convinced that World War II was such a major event that we shouldn't push it to the side.
What were we fighting for in the Second World War? What was all that about? It was about the values that are represented by the other two monuments.
The historic Rainbow Pool site at the foot of the Lincoln Memorial's reflecting pool was officially approved. But the struggle was just beginning. The surprise attack on Pearl Harbor shocked and angered the nation. Overnight, an army of young Americans swarmed into the recruiting stations.
Today, this is the spirit that is typical of all America, a scene that is being reenacted in every town, every city, every hamlet.
There was a tremendous patriotic feeling that swept across the country, and everybody just had one thought in mind, and that was to get in and take some part in it.
the months after America's entrance into the war produced only a series of costly and humiliating defeats.
Well, the Japanese attacked the Philippines, and they told us to keep holding the bag. We knew the handwriting was on the wall. Bataan surrendered April the 9th, 1942.
More than 5,000 American prisoners and thousands more Filipinos died in the infamous Bataan Death March.
I was a POW. I wasn't afraid to die, but I was afraid to be tortured. So then I said, well, I'm gonna break out of here. This is it.
In the United States, loyal American citizens also became prisoners.
There was a great deal of stories being spread about Japanese Americans being spies. We were one of the last ones to be interned. I had a baseball glove, and a baseball bat. And as I got on the train, the MPs confiscated my bat. We had barbed wire all the way around the camp, and about every 200, 300 feet, there were armed guard towers with machine guns and searchlights. I never lost any faith in our country. I probably was more ashamed of my Japanese background.
The Japanese advance in the Pacific was finally halted in June of 1942.
We had to stop them at Midway. I was assigned to USS Yorktown, which was the state of the art at that time in aircraft carriers.
Courageous U.S. Navy dive bombers completely surprised the Japanese, ultimately sinking all 4 carriers of their main battle force. But the USS Yorktown was also lost.
I'll never forget lying on the deck, and when those torpedoes hit and blew, the ship lifted like some great arm had just lifted it up and then dropped it. And I took a look over, saw about 2,000 heads bobbing in the water. And I'm going to join them. Midway was the turning point of the war in anybody's calculation.
With the battle for the memorial's location over, the quest for its design began.
You have to recognize right from the beginning that you can't tell the whole story of it. That's the job of a museum. A memorial is supposed to evoke memory, but it is not supposed to teach history.
In 1996, a 2-stage open design competition attracted some 400 concepts. Some of the most prestigious architects and artists in the world competed.
The most difficult idea to express architecturally is this idea of unity, that this was one of the few times when the entire nation came together.
The design had to preserve the mall's sweeping vistas, complement the classical architecture in the area, and retain the park-like setting.
The real responsibility here was to make a place for the veterans and the event of World War II, and to fit that particular place into the larger scheme of the mall.
Based on these criteria, the jury unanimously selected the design of Friedrich St.Florian, a naturalized American citizen and former dean of the Rhode Island School of Design.
And there's certain ironies, of course, that someone who had come from Austria would be the winning designer, just as there's certain ironies in Mile Inn being the designer of the Vietnam Memorial.
After we had won the competition, I came to Washington and I went out celebrating with my team, and we thought we have a design and we're going to build it. And little did I know how difficult this would be.
Now on to marking another key moment in American history, World War II. Elizabeth Farnsworth begins our report.
The proposed memorial was immediately criticized for its large scale and for breaking up the open space that had been the chief characteristic of the mall.
The style of the architecture was also criticized.
I would prefer a more contemporary expression in the memorial design. However, the genius of it, right from the beginning, was that it fit the demands of the site.
The association with a classical language became a great public and professional controversy because it was claimed it was old-fashioned. There was so much criticism, it seemed to be quite possible that the memorial would never be built.
I became somewhat philosophical about it. There wasn't a major memorial ever built in Washington that wasn't surrounded by controversy.
In July of 2000, a revised design was presented that addressed many concerns.
It was tremendously reduced in physical impact, and yet it maintained its essential cupping of the space.
The plaza, with a reconstructed rainbow pool and fountains, had an open, welcoming feel to draw visitors from the surrounding monuments. It rested 6 feet below the level of the reflecting pool to preserve the mall's magnificent views. 2 arched pavilions, signifying the Atlantic and Pacific theaters of the war, form the memorial's side entrances. Colonnades of 56 granite pillars encircled the plaza, representing each of the U.S. states and territories during the war and the District of Columbia. And within a commemorative space, a Freedom Wall honored the 400,000 Americans who died.
The agony that it took to achieve the World War II memorial clearly made it better, made it simpler, made it more direct, made it more publicly understandable, and that was the goal.
Now it was time to turn the idea into reality. In 1942, the first American troops were sent across the Atlantic to fight Hitler's armies. Along the way, U.S. naval forces confronted German submarines. During the war, thousands of Allied ships and their crews were lost in the Battle of the Atlantic. Ground operations began with a series of amphibious invasions in North Africa, then Sicily, then mainland Italy.
The Americans were, admittedly, very green to start with. None of them had ever been in combat before, obviously. That was where they learned that this war is serious.
You didn't know what's going to happen. You didn't have any idea when you first go in there that how lethal it's going to be. You see the people getting killed and stuff like that. It's not easy.
We got into Palermo Harbor from Africa. My skin and blood just tingled that I realized my father came from here. And there was many soldiers from Patton's army coming down, wounded, bandaged up, going to the hospital ship. The Germans were attacking us and dropping bombs all over the harbor.
This is a picture of me that was taken in front of my airplane. Angio was only about a week old at that time. And when some of them heard that African Americans were flying their airplanes, they didn't believe it. We weren't known then as Tuskegee Airmen. I didn't get afraid until they started shooting at me. And I found myself sitting right behind the FW-190. And I just shot him. And I never looked back.
We were out on a patrol, and the guy next to me got hit. I was just paralyzed with fear. So the sergeant said, "Move or I'll kill you." I said, "That's it, I'm moving." Before I had a chance to even hit the dirt, they opened up, see, and I got hit in the lower leg. And boy, this excruciating pain took over.
They would bring the fellows out on the boats and load them onto the ship, and then we'd operate on them as much as we could. They would have frozen feet. A lot of them would step on mines. We did a lot of amputations, a lot of amputations. plane dived on us. And I looked up and the mast was just coming over this way. I thought, I can't live. I'm going to die.
By the time the Allies marched into Rome in June of 1944, tens of thousands of American lives were lost. On Veterans Day 2000, the memorial's official groundbreaking took place. Only a quarter of the 16 million World War II veterans still survived. Many attending wondered if they would live to see the memorial finished. A massive fundraising program began.
It is time to say thank you.
Tens of millions in private contributions began to pour in.
It made me so happy when the contributions to the World War II Memorial Fund began to come in from school classes. And I thought, this is perfect because it means that these young people are respecting what their forebears did.
But just as preparations got underway, new protests were raised about the memorial's location and design, and the nature of the approval process. A legal action was filed, and everything came to a standstill. J. Carter Brown, chairman of the Commission of Fine Arts, vigorously supported the memorial's location and design.
Nothing in our history is of the significance of World War II.
There were those who were given the opportunity to express their objections over several years. And ultimately, their point of view did not prevail.
Matters of design and matters of symbolism are also matters of the heart. And sometimes in the heat of battle, you let your heart lead the way. And the fact that the World War II generation is gradually dying off is important to getting this memorial built.
Congress agreed and halted all legal challenges. Construction on the mall finally began in September 2001.
It is a little overwhelming when you stand on that site and you see Washington to the east and Lincoln to the west and know that this memorial has to stand the test of time.
First, because of poor soil conditions, a reinforced concrete wall was installed down to bedrock to prevent groundwater infiltration. Following this, the old Rainbow Pool was demolished and major excavation began. While criticism of the memorial continued, the commitment of the workers on the site intensified. Many of them had served in the military.
I'm a Vietnam veteran myself. This makes it great doing this one though, because it's a veteran doing it for veterans.
It kind of all came home in the fall of 2002. They were driving piles, boom, 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 and it was like howitzers going off. All I could think about was the guys at Normandy and Tarawa and how they deserve this.
In August of 1942, American forces invaded Guadalcanal. This began a broad offensive, island by island, moving steadily across the Pacific.
Well, at that time, the life expectancy of a second lieutenant was 3 seconds if they got to the beach. Going in, the coxswain was standing up and a 75 round hit him in the gut. And the rest of the guys had to swim or crawl to the beachhead. We were so close to the enemy that we talked to them. And we'd roll hand grenades at each other.
In New Guinea is just about the end of the world, in my opinion. I didn't know what banzai was, and I asked the interpreter, I said, what is banzai? He said, that's to kill or to be killed. I said, uh-oh. My heart be beating so loud that I'd think that was going to give me away. When they come in, they just keep coming in on you, all around the perimeter.
Our ships were all located off the Tarawa Atoll. When we landed on the beach, I lay with my back up against the seawall shooting movies of incoming boats and watching them blow up. On a piece of ground not much larger than Central Park in New York, there were 6,000 people killed and 5,000 were Japanese.
Every miserable island was a stepping stone toward the enemy's homeland. The memorial required more than 17,000 pieces of precisely cut granite.
It was a unique opportunity to design and build these big blocks of stones.
Most of the stone comes from quarries in South Carolina and Georgia. In numerous facilities, massive blocks of granite are cut and shaped into the pieces of an architectural jigsaw puzzle.
The whole plan of the memorial is based on segments of circles. We almost have no stone that is just simply a square stone.
Every piece of stone in the memorial has a number, and they have a numbering system so that we can keep track of production.
Early in 2003, the finished granite began to arrive at the site.
On the 3rd of February, we put the first stone in the memorial, and it was the balcony stone on the South Pavilion. It was a huge step for us. It was the equivalent of the cornerstone.
Now the puzzle pieces came together. An army of stonemasons swept in, and the granite pillars rose rapidly from the foundation. State and territory names were carved in each base. Only one World War II veteran actually worked on the memorial.
During World War II, I was a staff sergeant in the United States Air Corps. I was over in China. A lot of the pilots that crashed, landed, and burned, and they're still there. The veterans deserve this. Out of all the projects that I've ever worked on, this is my crowning glory.
The construction of the Pacific and Atlantic pavilions presented the greatest challenge. Their arches contain more than 300 tons of granite.
The arches had to be built of solid blocks. There was this issue of the enormous weight of the stone. I remember I couldn't sleep. I could not wait until the first arch was up to full height. And I must say, it came out fine.
By July 4th, 2003, the finished shape of the memorial could be clearly seen from high above in the tower crane. U.S. daylight bombing raids escalated in August 1943. There were more than 60,000 American casualties in the skies over Europe, with thousands more shot down and taken prisoner.
We were assigned to B-17 bombers. And I was in the ball turret. And when you're on a bomb run, there are no fighter planes. All there is flak. And you're flying in formation, and to see a plane just disintegrate. It's there, and then 2 minutes later, it's gone. And that's 10 men just gone. You never forget that.
My first mission had to be to the Ploesti oil fields, which at that point was the most heavily defended target in Europe, when all of a sudden we got a direct hit. And about 5 seconds later, then a tremendous explosion. The next thing, I'm floating around out in midair like a homesick angel. So I reach for my ripcord and give it a yank, and then I look up and I see the wing of my airplane is coming down right on top of me, and the wing went right down beside me.
We got hit over the target, lost 2 engines. We were going home when still a 3rd engine went out on us. There's a short runway, but it's all there is. The co-pilot and I both jumped on the brakes, We stopped short 8 or 10 feet from the end of that runway. We walked away from that landing. I should say we danced away from it with a leap of joy. And for that, I won the Distinguished Flying Cross.
The stories of World War II will be illustrated in a series of 24 sculpted bronze panels. More than 200 pieces of art will embellish the memorial. Master sculptor Ray Caskey was commissioned for the project.
The purpose of the World War II Memorial is to honor the sacrifice of the fighting men, to honor the efforts of the people on the home front, and to commemorate the unity of the nation.
It is a massive undertaking.
The bas-relief panels represent the mobilization of the United States. We finally came up with 12 episodes for the Atlantic Front, 12 episodes for the Pacific Front, and a group of World War II reenactors modeled these things for us.
Each meticulous detail must be sculpted first in clay before it is sent to the foundry.
The sculpture of the memorial provides a degree of detail that humanizes it, brings it down to the scale of individual involvement.
The most ambitious works of art are two 25-foot-high canopies, each with 4 American eagles, that suspend a 5,000-pound victory laurel.
I started with how to hold up the laurel wreath. And I thought, well, what could I use? The American eagle is the obvious choice.
Much of the work takes place at the foundry. Once cast, the pieces are welded, hammered, and ground into shape. It is a large industrial process, and all the sculpture will take nearly 4 years to complete. During World War II, America was transformed into an industrial superpower, the arsenal of democracy.
The only way to meet our increased needs for more weapons is for every American, men and women, to go out and get a war job.
Well, Rosie the Riveter, of course, was important. That was the breakthrough that brought women into the workforce for the first time in the United States in a big way.
I went to work in a defense plant as a drill press operator. And at that time, I weighed 98 pounds, and I was 21 years of age. We were in the defense work to keep things going for the ones that were out there fighting for us. It was wonderful. Sometimes I would see P-51s and we'd say, ooh, we worked on those.
American farmers also did their part.
So there were critical shortages of food, and the biggest grain basket in the world was right in America. So farm families rightfully felt that they were deeply involved in the war effort.
Everybody was involved. My grandmother Katie was saving bacon grease because they used bacon grease to make munitions. My aunt was saving string. That string then would be used in making uniforms. My uncle, he was saving silver foil, so he had a ball this big.
We were issued tickets for how much gasoline we could get for our automobiles. We had food rations. Everybody felt that we had to defend our country.
Like the nation in World War II, all the elements of the memorial began to work together. First, 52 sculpted bronze ropes were placed between each of the pillars.
All the states are there, and they are all united. and that bronze rope is symbolic of that unity.
2 bronze wreaths were also hung on each pillar, one of oak and one of wheat.
The oak wreath is meant to represent the military and industrial strength which was brought to bear in World War II. The wheat wreath represents the agricultural might of the United States.
2 flatbed trucks arrived at the site, carrying 8 American eagle sculptures and their large laurel wreaths. This was the moment of truth for the sculptor and the installation team.
I don't think you experience sculpture or space with your eyes alone. You experience it with your body, and the only way you can experience that is at the full size.
The eagles on columns had to be flown through the air and carefully lowered through the top of the pavilions.
Well, I feel about 8,000 pounds lighter now that the eagles have landed.
Then the first of 2 gigantic wreaths was slowly lifted in the air to join up with the eagles' beaks.
It was the first opportunity to see it all together after 4 years of working on it in pieces. It was stunning to me to see it at that size.
Below the wreath is a replication of the Victory Medal, and every serviceman and servicewoman at the end of the war were presented with this medal. What surrounds that medallion is victory on land, victory at sea, victory in the air.
But victory was still uncertain on June 6, 1944, known to all as D-Day. In the early hours of the morning, the largest armada in history crossed the English Channel to Normandy, beginning the long and costly road toward the final conquest of Nazi Germany.
General Eisenhower, my dad, he went out to see the 101st Airborne. He knew that some of those boys would be killed.
My brother Ray and I were real close. Yeah, that's what twins are. And then the only thing ever separated us was D-Day.
We were the first ones in before the Army. And I've never seen so many planes in my life come over us. We had a lot of bombers, they bombing. Then the Army went in. I saw men that drowned. That was a bad sight.
On the day of the Normandy invasion, I would have been 23 years of age, and heading into the beach, you could hear them whistling over your head, which were the big guns from the battleships.
Well, they come there from Bedford. We was picked to go in on the first wave, the suicide wave, because that's really what happened.
On the beach, it was a matter of seeing
My worst memory of World War II was Omaha Beach. There was no way you could get by without seeing somebody dead or severely wounded. We had one fellow on the beach, he had both legs blown off, and he wouldn't let anybody near him. He just sat there and bled to death. It was terrific.
More than 2,000 brave Americans died on the beaches of Normandy, most in battle for the first time.
So we went down to the cemetery, and the first grave I came to was my brother.
19 young men died on D-Day from Bedford. I was 15 when my brothers were killed. And the telegram, of course, just read, "We regret to inform you that Bedford T. Hoback has been killed in action." The second telegram came on the following day saying my younger brother, Raymond, was missing in action. The entire community was crying because there were just telegrams coming in from everywhere. you would see the stars on these little red and white flags. We had 2 flags with the gold stars in them after my brothers died.
The symbol of the gold star was the inspiration for the memorial's Freedom Wall.
The Wall of Stars refers directly to the gold star that was given to mothers or wives of men who were killed in service, and each gold star represents 100 dead.
There are 4,000 gold stars, and there's a very simple inscription, and it says, "Here we mark the price of freedom."
There are numerous inscriptions in the memorial. It is the art of carving poetry into stone.
You've got an inscription that refers to D-Day and Midway. President Roosevelt speaks to the arsenal of democracy. President Truman pays tribute to the heroic men and the women in the armed forces and how America's debt can never be repaid to them.
The names of famous battles and theaters of war are also there, like a history book in stone. Following the Normandy landings and the breakout from Saint-Lô, Allied forces began the long drive across France towards Germany.
By the summer of '44, we were beginning to decimate the Luftwaffe. I was leading the squadron and ran into 22 109s and then shot down 5 of them. And you don't look at it as killing somebody, you're destroying an airplane that'll destroy you. Something is difficult for you who never fought in a war is that there is no morality in a war. You have to accept that. And you do anything to win a war.
By August of 1944, Paris was liberated and the enemy was in full retreat. But as the Allies pressed towards Germany, the fighting became more desperate.
That winter, it was terribly, terribly cold. There were months that we didn't get to change our clothes, didn't get to take a shower. The food was horrible.
The GI's favorite cartoonist, Bill Malden, captured the mood.
But again, we were bound and determined that we were going to beat the enemy, which was Hitler.
Then came the Battle of the Bulge, the bloodiest fight in U.S. history.
The morale was very low. We were thinking the war was going to be over soon, and this was a big surprise to us.
Facing 500,000 German troops in the snow and cold, the American army suffered nearly 20,000 killed and 15,000 taken prisoner.
At one time, they put me on what they call like a graveyard detail, picking up dead bodies. And that wasn't a pretty sight. I was hitting my arm, and I lost a lot of friends. In fact, one of the friends was killed right next to me.
Following the battle, President Roosevelt addressed a shaken nation.
The toughest job has been performed by the average, easygoing, hard-fighting young American who carries the weight of battle on his own shoulders. It is of small satisfaction to him to know that monuments will be raised to him in the future. He wants and he needs, and he is entitled to insist upon, our full and active support now.
Meanwhile, things were looking up in the Pacific, where American ground and naval forces were pushing back the Japanese.
Many people say that the submarine force was the key to victory in the Pacific. By 1944, I was commanding officer of Drum. We were ordered north to the Luzon Straits, and the very next day, MacArthur came with hundreds of ships and uttered his famous remark, "I have returned." Drum fired 24 torpedoes, sank 3 ships and damaged 3 more, and that won me my Navy Cross.
Well, I always say, you know, you can forgive if you get even. So I had a chance to even at school when I was fighting in the guerrilla forces. So here comes the Army down the road. I said, yeah, I'm a Marine. I've been waiting for you guys for 3 years.
On February 19, 1945, the U.S. Marines landed on the heavily defended island of Iwo Jima.
We were unloaded off the ship and put on LSTs because we were going to be in the first wave. Now, my captain was hit within 15 minutes. He got hit through the throat. And I lost my platoon sergeant that afternoon. We were advancing towards the north, and all of a sudden, everybody started shooting up in the air behind us. And people were screaming. And finally, somebody says, Jay, gets me. Says, Jay, look up there. There's the American flag. And we were so happy, we said, well, we ought to be finished with this battle in a couple of days, not knowing we hadn't even started to fight yet.
We finally got around to 1945 for the invasion of Okinawa, which began on April 1. That is the time when the Japanese began their kamikazes. And eventually, 4 of the kamikazes hit our ship. The explosions were terrific. These bombs burst and shrapnel expanded all over. We lost 153 men on the ship, and eventually the ship went down.
Water plays an essential role in the World War II Memorial.
We have restored the rainbow pool. We've added multi-level pools at both the pavilion, and we also have waterfalls at the west end and a pool of water in front of the Freedom Walls.
There was strong interest in providing images that had a sense of light and life to them, and of course the dancing of the water will do that.
Landscaping began to enhance the mall's natural setting.
Of the 7.3 acres that comprise the site for the National World War II Memorial, 2/3 are either water or landscaped surfaces.
Lighting is also a critical part of the memorial's design.
When the lights go on again.
A lot of people see the major memorials at night, and we've got hundreds of light fixtures in this memorial. We did computer simulations, and those simulations helped us determine the types of fixtures and the number of fixtures that we needed.
When all the lights were set, the memorial appeared as a soft glow between the Washington Monument and the Lincoln Memorial, a new symbol of hope on the National Mall.
Lights go on again. All over the
The war in Europe was finally coming to an end. American forces crossed the Rhine River into Germany. Other troops were mopping up in Italy.
See, we were supposed to kick off the 12th of April, 45, but Roosevelt died and everything was off. Nobody's ever certain what happened, but all I know is I went out to rescue a radio man, and suddenly I felt this sting in my back of my right shoulder. Turned out later I had a broken neck. They put a big M on my forehead in my own blood to show that I had morphine. And there were a lot of people killed that day. It was a pretty bad day.
Because of the need for manpower, Japanese Americans were permitted to join the military.
We had to demonstrate to our fellow Americans that they had made a mistake when they considered us to be disloyal. We began our attack, and I was shot through the stomach. I told the fellas, let's keep on going. I was shot in the arm, and it was obvious that my arm was gone. We wiped out all 3 machine gun nests and we took over the hill. 1 casualty, me.
As the Germans fell back, a hideous crime was revealed.
I went to Brukenwald. The bodies were still there, stacked up 5 feet deep. I took pictures of half-burned corpses in ovens because we couldn't believe that human beings could do that to other human beings.
On May 8, 1945, Nazi Germany surrendered. There was dancing in Times Square. 1 tyrant down, 1 left to go. When the ceremonial entrance stone was laid into place, it was a sign that the memorial was nearly finished. Soon it would be open to the public, and final preparations were underway. The bronze panels depicting scenes of soldiers and civilians were installed. Powerful reminders of the human tragedies and triumphs of the war. The American flags were raised. Now the Allies turned all their might against the Empire of Japan. On August 6, 1945, over Hiroshima, a B-29 bomber dropped the first nuclear weapon ever to be used in war.
I could see it when we turned away. This black cloud, this thing hanging over the city and tumbling and boiling and sparks flying. I told the guys, I said, you have initiated nuclear warfare today. That's what we did.
3 days later, a second atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki.
Everything was gone. But there was one Shinto shrine, and then there was a church gone, but the church spire was standing with the cross up above it. And you wonder why those 2 emblems of religions were standing. God only knows.
The Japanese surrendered formally on September 2nd, 1945.
We joined the 5th Fleet, and I remember before we got to Tokyo Bay, as far as the eye could see were ships. And so I picked out my spot, got a pair of binoculars, and I watched them as they signed the treaty that ended the war. Neat, huh?
Almost 60 years after the most catastrophic war in history, the World War II Memorial was now a reality. It was opened to the public in April 2004.
The true value lies in what it represents as a symbol for future generations on that amazing site in that place of the mall in Washington, D.C.
It will be there as a reminder of those who pass the torch of freedom to the next generation.
What it's about, really, is dignity. This freedom business that people fought and died for is a pretty serious thing. It's not a joke. It's not something casual. It's about the biggest issues and the most meaningful things we have.
It must be demonstrated to one and all that democracy is not free. It's very costly.
I think it's an important memorial. 400,000 young Americans died in that war. Many were crippled or weakened emotionally or psychologically. So I don't think we ought to forget those sacrifices.
So it's to remind future generations, our kids and our grandkids, that someday in your life you may be called upon to make a sacrifice for your country, for liberty and for freedom.
Now the World War II Memorial rests in this magnificent location on the National Mall, along with the other great symbols of our democracy. It will stand as a testament to an entire generation of Americans who sacrificed and died in pursuit of an idea called liberty. Their legacy will live on amid the granite and the bronze. And future generations will not forget the price they paid for freedom.
Major funding for this program was provided by the Disabled American Veterans National Service Foundation, saluting the heroes of World War II and all who protect our heritage of freedom. DAV works to build better lives for disabled veterans and their families. And by Ford Motor Company Fund, celebrating a remarkable tribute to American courage, honor, and sacrifice. We are proud to join in sponsoring this presentation of the World War II Memorial, a testament to freedom.
Pays tribute to citizen soldiers who placed themselves in harm's way in the Atlantic and Pacific theaters of engagement. It recognizes the critical contribution of Americans on the home front from every state and territory. It remembers the darkest hours of the war and the greatest victories. It honors those who made the ultimate sacrifice to restore freedom and end tyranny. But above all, this memorial preserves the memory of a vanishing generation of Americans who sacrificed their own self-interest for the greater good of the nation. This is their testament to freedom. The National Mall in Washington tells our country's story. But one great chapter was missing. Here in the presence of Washington and Lincoln, we honor those 20th century Americans who took up the struggle during the Second World War and made the sacrifices to perpetuate the gift our forefathers entrusted to us. A nation conceived in liberty and justice. World War II was the largest conflict in American history.
This was a case in which Western civilization itself hung in the balance.
16 million men and women volunteered or were drafted.
Everybody was contributing to the war effort at that time.
It was all about freedom and the future of the free world.
Nearly 400,000 Americans died to preserve our way of life. And yet, for more than half a century, no national memorial remembered their sacrifice. Now that has changed. This is the story of the World War II Memorial and the generation of Americans it commemorates.
Major funding for this program was provided by the Disabled American Veterans National Service Foundation, saluting the heroes of World War II and all who protect our heritage of freedom. DAV works to build better lives for disabled veterans and their families. And by Ford Motor Company Fund, celebrating a remarkable tribute to American courage, honor, and sacrifice. We are proud to join in sponsoring this presentation of the World War II Memorial, a testament to freedom.
It's been a long time coming, but the World War II Memorial has now taken its rightful place among the other great monuments in our nation's capital. Hi, I'm Tim Russert. This is not a memorial to war, Rather, it celebrates the unity of the nation during a conflict that engulfed the entire world. It
A long time to develop the World War II Memorial, primarily because the veterans returning didn't have much interest in being memorialized.
The men and women came home from the war. All they wanted to do was get back to work, get on with their lives.
The Vietnam Veterans Memorial broke the ice, and we proceeded backwards to the Korean War Memorial. I think all of a sudden people said, hey, what about World War II, the biggest event of the 20th century?
In 1987, a combat veteran named Roger Durbin asked his congresswoman why there was no memorial to World War II in the nation's capital.
I said, well, sir, I think there is a memorial. Iwo Jima. He said, wrong. That's to one service. He said, there's no World War II memorial. I thought, this is unbelievable.
With the 50th anniversary of the war's end approaching in 1993, Congress finally passed legislation authorizing a national memorial to the World War II generation.
It became obvious that soon there'd be no one left who had experienced the war.
It really became our task to take their story into history.
The flames of World War II were burning long before it touched American soil. Nazi Germany under Adolf Hitler was overrunning Europe. In the east, the militaristic government of Japan had brutally invaded mainland China. America declared neutrality and clung to the hope for peace. Then came December 7th, 1941, the day of infamy.
It was a Sunday, and I was listening to the radio, and the announcer came on and said, Pearl Harbor is being bombed. And suddenly 3 aircraft flew right